Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mostly Harmless Economics. If you're wondering who I am, well, I am a mostly harmless economist, which already makes me way better than Peter Navarro. If you want to know more about me, please look below the video. So, today in this video, we're going to be talking about the 2018 trade war that was waged by the Trump administration. The trade war kicked off in early 2018, and it was truly unprecedented in its scale since the Great Depression, with some mind boggling numbers. It was a large scale, earth bending, high stakes conflict that usually required a team up of superheroes to resolve. The US began with tariffs on primary metals, machinery, computer products, and electrical equipment like solar panels and washing machines. And the first wave of product tariffs were soon followed by China specific tariffs that dwarfed the previous round. All of this means that the import tariffs increased by 6 times as much on almost 13% of annual US imports. But this was followed by swift retaliation from the most egregiously affected trade partners of the US. China was soon joined by the EU, Mexico, Russia, Turkey, and of course Canada, who all began levying retaliatory tariffs on US exports. These were mostly focused on agricultural products like tobacco, crops, and fisheries, but also alcoholic beverages like the Kentucky bourbon. You know, when Russia bans the imports of alcohol, shit is about to hit the fan. All this amounted to an increase in tariffs by almost 3 times, covering more than 8% of annual US exports. So, what was the fallout, at least in the short term? So, in this video, I'm going to give you a simple breakdown of the different channels, which often work in opposing directions. I will then talk about the theoretical case for when increasing tariffs might actually enhance national welfare and whether the 2018 trade war meets the conditions for this to be true. I'll then give you an idea about the overall effects of the tariff war in the US, as estimated by a number of really good researchers, but this does not tell the whole story, as we shall see. Also, expect lots of cool graphs and pictures that people who are interested in the political economy of the trade war might find interesting. A special shout out to Fajgelbaum, Goldberg, Kennedy, and Khandelwal, since a lot of the material in this video is based on their work. So let's talk about what happens when a trade war is waged. There are opposing but not equal forces at play here, further confirming the universe bending and law defying nature of the whole conflict. The first channel is that there will be a loss to consumers, since potentially they will be paying higher prices on imported goods from China and elsewhere because of the tariffs levied on them. This applies to both consumers of final goods as well as US producers who buy intermediate inputs from the targeted countries. But there is a potential for gain to some US producers of these very same goods, since they now face less competition from imported goods, or at least the prices of the goods of their competition has suddenly gone up. And of course, the US is going to collect more tariff revenue, which, if spent well, might also lead to some gains. But there is one more channel yet. It turns out that the rest of the world are not going to lay low while being slapped about by a bully like Peter Parker did. They're going to retaliate, which is in fact exactly what Peter Parker did slightly later in the same movie. And retaliation means that some US producers, like the Kentucky bourbon distilleries who used to export to these countries, are now going to suffer. And therefore, this will reduce the welfare enhancing effect from the second channel. So let's now talk about the first channel, which, spoiler alert, turns out to be the most consequential one. To quantify this channel, we need to figure out something called the pass-through to calculate the tax incidence. What this means is that we need to know how much of the tariff increase, which is basically like a tax, is being borne by exporters from China, Canada, and elsewhere, and how much of it is being borne by the US consumers and firms. Well, it turns out that there is almost complete 100% pass through, which means that almost all of the increase in tariffs is ultimately a burden on the US consumers, and they are the ones that they actually have to pay the entire increase in the price due to the tariff. This is confirmed by 3 separate studies. all of whom apply methods to circumvent any potential sources of bias in the data. As an unbiased reader myself, who has used similar methods in only two of my papers, I can tell you that I have 100% confidence in the methods that they use. So, yes, tariffs are paid at the port by Chinese exporters to the US authorities, but ultimately, in this 2018 trade war, they are being paid by the US consumers. This does not mean that China or Chinese firms or firms from the targeted countries remain unscathed. For example, China is paying in a different way. Imports of products targeted by the US tariffs fell on average by more than 30%. So Chinese firms are losing a lot of market share within the US. So this discussion sets up perfectly the intuition behind when a government can raise tariffs in order to maximize national income. If the pass through was much less than 100%, then the size of the consumer losses would be low. If this is coupled by domestic producers really benefiting from lower competition, as well as low levels of retaliation, a tariff increase might actually increase national income. But for this to hold, you have to select the products and sectors that you levy tariff against very carefully to ensure that all of these conditions hold. There was no such careful consideration when it comes to how the US went about their trade war. This figure from the Fajgelbaum et al. Paper captures the lack of economic rationale behind the ad hoc tariff increases. It shows that during the trade war, the US applied only five tariff rate changes to targeted varieties that were all very nice, very round numbers: 10%, 20%, 25%, 30%, and 50%. Virtually all products, more than 99% of all products, were hit with either a 10% or a 25% tariff change. If there was careful economic thinking behind the whole saga, we would expect to see a lot more variation in these numbers. So, what is the estimated size of the first channel? It turns out that US consumers bore losses to the tune of $51 billion or 0.27% of annual GDP. Amiti and Redding reports very similar numbers as well. This is a sizable decrease in real income for US consumers brought about by a self-inflicted trade war. What about the second channel? Well, at least some producers benefited from less competition from foreign producers to the tune of about $9.4 billion. But this gain potentially could have been almost twice as high in the absence of retaliation from the other countries that US levied tariffs against. Well, tariff revenue is pretty easy to calculate. So adding up all the channel yields a short-run loss in aggregate real income of $7.2 billion, which amounts to roughly 0.04% of GDP. This might not appear to be that big, but the net effect masks heterogeneous impacts across regions. The winners and losers are not the same people. So there might be people and firms who lost a lot while some other gained a lot. In fact, it turns out that real wages in the tradable sector in America fell by 1% due to the trade war, once you take into account the increased cost of living, partly due to the tariffs themselves. Amiti, Redding, and Weinstein also report a reduction in US real income of $1.4 billion per month by the end of 2018. So here's a map that shows that every county in USA experiences a reduction in the tradable real wage. And of course, USA is the only country that matters in the world, which is why we have a globe around this map. Incidentally, you can see that some counties lost more than others, but everybody experienced a reduction in real tradable wages. Incidentally, I hope that the electoral map that we will get to see in a week on November 3rd does not have red all over it either. But I digress. We will conclude with a cool graph that shows that while there may not have been an economic rationale behind the tariffs, there may have been a political economic rationale behind the trade war. This figure plots the protection from import tariffs that producers receive in a particular county against the Republican vote share in the 2016 presidential elections. So what we see is an inverted U shape. implying that those counties that had a share of 40 to 60% Republican votes received more protection from the way that US levied their tariffs as opposed to heavily Republican counties or heavily Democratic counties. Hence, US tariffs appear targeted towards sectors concentrated in politically competitive counties where voters are likely to be pivotal in elections. If you are a member of the Trump administration, firstly, what the hell are you doing here? Secondly, these are the voters in these counties in the middle that you want to win over, since you're never really going to lose the Republican heavy counties and you're never really going to win the Democrat heavy counties. By contrast, the trading partners retaliated by targeting exports in sectors that were concentrated in heavily Republican counties. So there might not be a political price to pay because these counties are unlikely to be flipped over, but it seems that retaliation was really targeted towards voters who voted Trump into power. All right, that's all for today, folks. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot for watching.